Guys, how are you?
Good. I'm feeling good. Today is my last day of work and I'm going to have like a nice vacation time. So I'm really excited about it.
Nice.
What are you going to do for vacations?
I'm going to visit a Chilean friend
Oh.
in Valencia.
Those Chileans are very boring, bro. I'm so sorry. But, I wouldn't.
This guy is the most bored one, but okay. He's the last one still in Valencia, you know, and I need to get out of Madrid.
So you're going there not because it's fun. You're going there because he's the only person
Exactly.
there, honestly.
The only friend he has in Spain, to be honest.
Okay, guys. Okay, but let's dive right into it because I'm very excited because today we have a leader as a guest. He has experience with product and marketing background and a fascinating experience with video games, mostly with apps that are video games. And he has worked out and built teams at, listen to these companies: Disney, Microsoft for Xbox Live Mobile, Electronic Arts, NFL, Mobility Wear. And within those roles, he oversaw partnerships, created monetization strategies for ads and premium games, drove engagement to the apps, got involved in user acquisition, building prototypes, and go-to-market strategies. He's also a strategic advisor for VY Esports, which is a company that specializes in creating experiences and content for esports generation that includes influencers, game developers, esports players, and the company has also partnered up with Capcom, Coca-Cola, Warner Music Group, and our guest is also the co-founder of the online store Styngr that offers in-game music experiences with a library of millions of tracks of popular artists for game developers in the metaverse. The music can be customized on how the music is going to be used either by the users or the game developers, while Styngr takes care of everything else. And what I mean everything else is the paperwork, the rights management, the reporting, the paying to the right holders, which if you are a game developer and you don't know how to do that, it could be something quite taxing and cumbersome. And also Styngr has amazing partnerships like Sony, Warner, and Believe. So I'll stop talking for us to give a round of applause to Alex Tarrand. How are you, Alex?
I'm doing well. Thank you. That was a very a nice introduction. It's a generous introduction.
I hope I didn't miss anything.
You got it, man. You got it.
We're super excited to have you here because like some of us, we are actually like we were gamers. Right now at the moment we are not anymore because we have to like pay rent and stuff.
Survive,
basically. But we're super excited, and also because of all your experience, like as Jorge just mentioned, plus music, which is basically what we're focusing on today more. And like in my experience, like we know that music licensing sometimes it can be like pretty expensive. If you have a project like an audiovisual project for you to get the license to use certain song or want to put like a soundtrack in your project, it's like actually sometimes tiring, expensive. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money. Plus, it's also a lot of paperwork to be done. So when we were like doing some research about Styngr and everything, I wanted to ask you like, what are the main obstacles Styngr is now focusing on removing so that all these deals are done in an easier way for creators?
That's a great question. Music licensing has an interesting history. A lot of it falls under what's called a sync license. When you get an audio work and you sync it perfectly with the visual work every time. This applies to video games. This applies to sometimes trailers that go across social media. And all of it was born out of the film industry. Literally, when they were playing records along with movies that would be projected onto a screen when these I think even like the Lumiere films first started, this was the birth of the sync industry. And to be honest, it's understandable, right? Like that's a piece of visual artwork for which somebody's being compensated, and the composers, the writers, the artists, the musicians, they're trying to get their fair share, which is understandable. The trick has been, like you said, around the nature of how that licensing works. Some teams, some bigger entities have, in the video games today, have built groups around this. Those groups can be anywhere from, I've seen teams of 2 or 3. I've seen teams at larger companies of a dozen or more who focus exclusively on licensing music and bringing it into games. And there are certain games that have figured out a pretty good pipeline around this. I think, NBA 2K is a really good example of that. I think Fortnite through Epic is a really fantastic example of this as well, where they have such a cadence and they have such a large group that's working on this sort of assembly line to make sure that they have a regular drops of music inside of the experience that are worked in a meaningful way. But even that's hard. Even that's expensive. Whenever you're inside of a gaming studio and you have to, whether it's on the engineering side, marketing side, any aspect, you have to staff a team and have that overhead. That's tricky, right? And even with that overhead, I mean, let's say you do have a team of 6, you still can't change timelines. You can have 9 people lined up in a row and you still can't make a baby in a month. That's impossible. So it's very similar with the nature of music licensing. So in this instance, we're doing a couple of things. Some of it's on the technology, where we just get it, pipe it in server side. And some of it's on the licensing side. We've worked with agreements across not only the major labels, but also the indie labels to come up with a way so that games can just adhere to a single license and they use technology to get these experiences into their games. So what we're trying to do, to go back to the initial question, is get the amount of time and effort and expense that it takes and just remove it and make it so that it's more akin to what games are used to implementing, which is like an ad SDK. Most games put in some sort of analytics or an advertising SDK into their game. We're very similar, except now you can get music and you can get the emotion, you can get the heart of that into the game, but also you can use it in clever ways. You can use it as a form of live ops. You can monetize it. We've seen some really interesting use cases.
That's amazing, and I love the fact that you brought the history about sync with the movies, with the movie stuff, because I think in gaming it's very similar in the sense that like music, as in movies, can either like make it or break it. Like it's many times I think people don't even notice it, but a great movie, a great game has an amazing music behind, and I think many customers, including like regular people, don't like notice that very often. So I wanted to ask you, like, is this message or this like importance perceived by game developers in your experience? Like, I wanted to know like a little bit more in your experience, like. How do negotiations go about music? Like, how flexible are they when they are looking for moods of music, for like types of music, whatever?
That's a great question. Having been a game maker myself, I don't know. They're similar to movie directors, and I can tell you that from having spent a long time in Los Angeles. There are few film directors, there are few game makers who design experience without some soundtrack playing in their mind.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Maybe it's not the soundtrack you're going to get.
Exactly.
But it's the soundtrack you want. And it's in your brain. And either you're listening to it while you're creating the experience.
Nice. Perfect.
Or you have it in mind when you're conceptualizing the experience. From what I've encountered, there's a pretty broad spectrum. We have game developers who come to us and say, here are the exact tracks we want. We want these 100 tracks. We are very excited about them, and we need to get them into the game. We go from our library and put it in. I mean, we have a library of 20 million songs. So like we typically have those tracks, or at least 99% of those tracks. But we also have folks who come and they want us to handle the curation. We actually had this conversation earlier this week, where game development is a labor of love, but it is a labor. I mean, you can, especially at crunch time, you can have 16, 17-hour days. And if you can outsource a particular thing that somebody can do to help you with, that's a very high value. So we had one game developer who actually was a console developer too. And they're very much interested in having a degree of curation done on our side. And we're happy to do it. But they have very specific asks.
Okay.
A lot of folks want music that's based by genre. That's the easiest, right? Do you want, at a high level, do you want rock or do you want rap? At the sub levels, there's just hundreds and hundreds, right? Do you want synth wave? Do you want dark wave? Do you want trip hop? There's all these different genres that sit underneath it. And we have a really nice view into what the label's priorities are, as well as what's trending on social media. TikTok has become pretty much the best barometer for what folks want to listen to in the immediate moment. We think games are going to be able to do that really soon as well. But for us, we then go in, we have an artist management team. They go, they do curation, they send it over. And then we have some folks who are just like, we don't know. This is the genre we're in. Can you do some research and tell us what might map to the audience? And for that, we go directly to the labels. We say, here's the audience, here's the geographies, here's the territories. What's going to hit? What's going to land here? And they give us some direction, which is actually really nice.
That's amazing. And like, absolutely, as you said, like the gaming industry is like also growing a lot and at an enormous rate. I was reading an article in Murder Intelligence, I think was the name of the magazine, that they have a CAGR of like 9% from here to 2027. It's huge. It's an industry that's growing a lot, and for sure they're gonna meet music. So I wanted to ask you, like, if like in Styngr plans, because like you were talking about these guys coming to you asking for specific records sometimes, and sometimes based on mood, like or on genres. Have you thought of like opening like a small part of the company that might have like a stock music of your own instead of like licensing music from maybe a label or whatever, like, because it could be like a cheaper option and it could be like Styngr. So I don't know, maybe some clients, especially like in this context of growing industry, there are going to be a lot of indie developers that don't have such a budget and they're going to need like more economic options. So have you thought about, is that on the map of Styngr in a near future or not yet?
You know, we have thought about it, but to tell you the truth, all the labels, whether they're major or the big indie aggregators for which a lot of indie labels sit underneath, they all have folks who specialize in that, who do stock. So we could pull stock if we need to. We went about that problem in a slightly different way, because really what we're trying to do is just the democratization of music, right? Having any developer, any platform, any budget get access to it. I want a brand new indie developer who's launching their game and launching their title to be able to get access to the exact music they want, whether it's subgenres, whether it's big hits, whether it's back catalog stuff from the 70s, the 80s, whatever fits their experience. That's the goal. And we have a couple of models where you don't actually pay anything, right? So you can inject advertising, for instance. You could create a radio station, have it ad funded. You collect half of that revenue. The other portion of it you pay out as royalties. We have subscription-based models. So if you wanted to have an offering that you fold into, say, a gaming battle pass, you would collect revenue on it and then you pay the rest out as royalties. So for us, if the budgets aren't necessarily there, or if you want music to help with monetization, you're looking for additional monetization paths, that's who we want music to be. So that was sort of our way of solving that problem.
That's amazing.
Awesome. And I'm curious about, now that you mentioned that sometimes indie or small game developers, sometimes they don't have access to these big catalogs, right? And sometimes I feel that it's because on the other side of the other party, they are missing out the important information about these game developers and the opportunities that are there. So my question is, like, what are the benefits of licensing music to these games, or are they not famous as, I don't know, as you just said, like 2K, Maiden, GTA, or FIFA, but probably these music right holders, they need to understand that licensing music to these indie developers or smaller games will bring more benefits, but at the same time to not decreasing the value of one music, but at the same time making the whole creative process of the game developing way easier.
I understand what you're saying. You know, first thing I would start with is you've got to have some empathy on the label side too, because typically the teams are small as well. So you can have a major label, and they could have a team of a half dozen working across all of their game licensing. And these deals take a year. Sometimes these deals take 2 years to finish. So the amount of deals they can handle is not enormous, right? Because it's a very human-led process that takes a lot of work. There's simply no way to circumvent it. So if you are only able to process a dozen or 24 deals a year, if you're a business, you have to prioritize the deals that are going to give you the largest amount of money. You prioritize the games that are going to give you $20 million up front, right?
True,
because that's guaranteed. And if you could only handle a dozen, that's a material amount of money that's coming in. The trick is, to use the old iceberg, it's a little tired, but that sort of iceberg metaphor where here's the part that you see above the water, but then here's the part you don't see below the water.
Yeah.
If those 12 big games or big gaming platforms, let's call them even 24, they don't even represent the piece of the iceberg that's above the water. They represent a flag that sits on the piece that's above the water. Everything else underneath it could be an iceberg the size of Everest, is gaming, because it is a $200 billion industry.
Yeah.
It's huge. It's multi-platform. It's across PC, VR. It's going to be AR soon, mobile, console. There's just so much of it, and it's never stopped. Since the advent of gaming, it doesn't slow down. Gaming is usually on the forefront. So any new hardware that comes out, games is there instantly. And it's impossible to reach unless you have some scalable way to reach it. So that's been sort of our thesis, is, to your point, you will not be able to deal with all of these game development houses, large or small. Those don't even have to be small developers. Those can still be AAA developers, but just who don't have the time or the wherewithal to be able to go through that process for a year. And they still want music in their game. So if you find a solution that fits both parties, then the goal is to just get as much music out there as possible. And as the metaverse starts to become something different than just MMOs, as the metaverse starts to become these environments that you can spend hours and hours and days and live like a meaningful part of your life, and there has to be music there. There has to be music. It was mentioned earlier that what is a movie, a great scene in a movie without that piece of music? Well, what is it sitting around with your friends in an environment for 4 hours without music? Like, I can't really imagine a place in life in which I do that outside of camping. And even then, I still bring music.
Absolutely. And now that you say, gaming is always at the upfront of things, and they are integrating everything. And you guys at Styngr, you want to reduce all the friction that is related with music licensing. I think you guys are doing a pretty good job. Like, you just recently have this partnership with Warner Music Group to have the recordings available for these developers, right? And however, what are the potential challenges when it comes to licensing music to now these games are more customizable? When it comes to this social space in the game are gathering more importance, a bigger role, and also games are more integrated with the metaverse. So what are the challenges that are going to start popping out?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's a couple of ones that are happening now, and there's a couple of ones that are really big on the horizon. So some of the ones that are happening now is just curation. When you have so much content, I mean, we're integrated across all the major labels, and some of these indie labels, like the major aggregators there, can have 20,000 indie labels underneath them. So the breadth of content is absolutely enormous, and it's like spoiled for choice, right? It's kind of like going into a grocery store that's endless. What do you pick? Where do you go? What do you find? And music can make or break it. I remember and not to date myself, but in playing these early games, these console games of the 90s, they had especially EA Sports, they had such good music worked in. And that's where I would get my music discovery, is playing NHL and playing Madden and hearing those tracks that were going to be weaved inside of the game. Is awesome. I mean, they're still doing that.
Absolutely. They're tastemakers.
Yes, they're tastemakers, and that curation is important. you can throw a lot of stuff at the wall, but what you throw in there is genuinely important. That's why we're focusing on providing what the folks, what people, want to hear. But I think what's coming on the horizon is this burgeoning world of Web3, which is coming hard and fast. I mean, the last Game Developers Conference, I'm going to say 70% of it was dedicated to Web3. I would be surprised if it's not more in the next GDC. There's some really interesting, exciting things that can happen in games around interoperability, going from environment to environment, game to game. There are some challenges there on not only from the game maker side, but from the music side. So if you are a game developer and you have a big ecosystem underneath you, Ubisoft and EA, having interoperability within your own ecosystem potentially makes sense, because that revenue that you collect still rolls up into you as a game developer. Those individual studios, though, can be very competitive with one another, right? They have their own individual goals they're trying to meet. So even there's a bit of friction. But if you're trying to have interoperability with competitors, with big market competitors, and you're trying to say somebody can buy something in their ecosystem and spend their dollars there, but they can use it in your ecosystem, that's a new model. That's a brand new model for games. And I'm seeing that there's a bit of a generational divide here. Some of the Web3 native experiences that are coming out, metaverses games, philosophically, they're okay with that from the start, and they're making models to incorporate that. But some of the legacy game makers, some of the giants of the industry, that's a tough pill, and it's a jagged pill. So I think there's going to be some exciting challenges there. I'll tell you, actually, that's where the music industry is a bit more flexible. They're accustomed to their content being agnostic across all these different platforms. Nice. So I think there's a lot of interesting work that can be done there. We actually have plans for some NFT products that will come out in the beginning of next year. But it presents its own unique challenges from a licensing perspective, as you can imagine.
And I love how music has been evolving kind of at the same time on how video games are being developed. I remember just like simple things like playing GTA and just being on the car and being able to just like switch radio station was something like amazing that I loved, like doing that, or like playing Guitar Hero. It was like an experience like, oh, like this is awesome. I'm a rock star now, And I bet like a lot of people actually started playing instruments because of that.
And now, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And now with all this technology of Web3, metaverse, like we're now seeing experiences like Snoop Dogg in the Sandbox, Ariana Grande, Justin Bieber, Marshmello also like having concerts in Fortnite. And everything is like kind of based and built around building a personalized experience for the artist itself. Like if the artist wants to showcase an album, a single release, merch, a tour, like the whole experience can be like being developed around that idea. And I feel that at some point, as it has happened, we're going to have so many experiences in the metaverse, so many competitors, that we are going to be like oversaturated, And I would love to hear, like, with your experience, what would you say are the key factors that might make a music metaverse experience more attractive than others to the audience?
Oh, that's a question. So, one, I would say I love those big activations. I love those big concerts. I think they were amazing. I think they pushed the industry forward. I think they showed the power and the value for not only the gaming industry, because they had these unbelievable concurrent numbers, right? Like 12.5 million, but also the value for the music industry. An artist's stream count went up by 4x for half a year. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal in that world. But those are expensive too, right? They're pricey to run. And I think it's a cost benefit. I think if you're a really big studio, it absolutely makes sense for you. I think if you're a smaller studio, it's cost prohibitive. And even then, even with a big studio, like you said, once you have a certain amount of those go live in an ecosystem, there's diminishing returns in terms of the amount of audience that's coming in. And once the novelty wears off, then as opposed to just coming in to see this strange, unique thing, you're going to come in because you're an artist of the music. I mean, you're a fan of the music, rather. You're a big fan of that particular genre, that particular artist. You're there for them as well as the environment. I think the real key is going to be building scalable architecture that is repurposable. So as a game company, you're for a long time now, since the advent of these big server-side games, let's say Sims was a great example of a game that led the way. You can throw these interesting events, but the underlying architecture, the software behind that is highly repeatable. The events that you do for, let's just say, holidays, your Valentine event, your Christmas event, these events all leverage the same underlying infrastructure to run them. So from that perspective, they're low cost for the game developer. You build it once and you get a lot of really cool utility around it. I see music going in this direction as well, where you build an environment which is built around listening to music and you work it into the experience. Or you just make music a very natural part of the experience as opposed to it having to be this big event like our everyday lives. I mean, I love it when I can go to a concert. It's fantastic. Does that prevent me from listening to music every single day in some format? In some part of my life? Absolutely not. It just has to become normal. And once you have that infrastructure in place and you can start running these events against it, then I think we'll see the second wave of creativity that's coming out. Games, to go back into the history of games, they followed this path too. Live ops even happened with to a degree with cartridges. You would have sequels coming out. You would have holiday editions coming out. You had to bake that into hardware that would socket into another piece of hardware. And you had to go out and you had to buy a physical thing for it.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden you had these server-side games where they would push patches, right? These even consoles, they push big patches to bring in a new piece of content that would be there for 3 months or a limited amount of time that you could get excited about. Now it's all about tools, infrastructure tools that allow you to do those micro events on a daily basis if you want, if you have the team that's set up for it. That's where music should go. Once you have the infrastructure in there, you should be able to do album drops, song releases, NFT drops, artist releases. And then in conjunction with that, get some likeness rights. Put them as a character in the game. Put them as a narrative in the background. This is where NBA 2K does really exciting stuff where it's like, oh, by the way, do you want to do a collaboration with a major artist? And it brings you on this narrative, on this journey, on that storyline, working it meaningfully into games. I think that's what's next.
Absolutely. Now that you just mentioned that, it came to mind. There is one artist that we follow, Bizarrap, and he very recently he did a collaboration with 2K, and it was amazing. It was amazing. Alex, honestly, you were fabulous. The channel is yours. Let us know if you have any contact for people to reach out to you. Let us know what you have going on in your life. Let us know what Styngr has going on. So please, the channel is yours.
Thank you so much, guys. I had an absolutely wonderful time. I love talking about games, and thank you for having me on the show. I mean, I would say if you're a game or a metaverse, hit our website, man. It's www.styngr.com. And or please feel free to hit us up on LinkedIn as well. But we have some really fun stuff going live starting next month, and we have some really interesting things going live to the end of the year. So hopefully we can chat again. I give you some updates.
Of course,
absolutely. Our pleasure. Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Alex.
You have little jewels that you just leave to us, and honestly, again, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Fantastic. See you guys next week. Bye.
Hey, muchas gracias por escucharnos y no olvides de seguirnos en Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora o la plataforma digital que sea de tu preferencia. Si te gustó el podcast, no olvides recomendarnos a tu grupo de amigos o colegas, ya que esa es la mejor manera de que sigamos creciendo la comunidad. También nos puedes encontrar en Instagram, Facebook y YouTube como 8000 kilómetros podcast. Cualquier comentario, duda o sugerencia es más que bienvenida y nos vemos en el siguiente episodio.